the first thing that'll get a company's attention is to come in as the marketer and say, I don't want to spend a single dollar until we fix these things. And they're
Right.
like, whoa, because marketers come in and it's usually, I need more money, right? That's the thing that they see us come in and they see, like, the proverbial handout everywhere we go. And mine is the opposite. It's like, I don't want to spend a dollar because I don't want to bring somebody to the table that the promise is not being delivered upon.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm always excited to be chatting with marketers who've worn a lot of hats and are still wearing a lot of hats. So I'm excited to be chatting with Julie Roehm, who I met originally when you were at Chrysler. So I actually went to Detroit to meet with you. You were very kind to meet with little scrappy SEM and SEO agency back in the day. But Julie, you've been involved in a bunch of different brands, big and small, high consideration purchases, low consideration purchases. You've had Party City, which is spontaneous purchase. You've got cars, which are typically not quite as spontaneous. So, and you're an advisory on an advisory board for a nonprofit. So I'd love to hear sort of how you're allocating your time at the moment. Like, what are the things you're working on that are most exciting?
Well, thank you. And it's always fun. Yes. Since people don't know you and I, but yeah, having gone back, I think this was like, like early O's is when we met. So it's been over 20 years. So when they talk about the industry and, smart people kind of getting together and you kind of, stay in touch. And it's just been amazing what you've done with all of your brands, really, truly. Always fun to talk to you. Yeah. For me, I've been, as you know, like I'm a little bit of a, they call like best athlete, where you come in and my shtick clearly is marketing. But as we've grown, having been in this industry for, almost 30 years, moved into digital rapidly when it became the thing. And then, I would always meet with people like yourselves early on because there was just so much to learn about what was possible in the digital marketing realm. And now that has just evolved 1,000-fold. And so I like to keep my pulse on that all the time, frankly. But with what I do, I like to take sort of that innovation and curiosity, even in my own practice. So while I started out as a traditional sort of CMO marketer and all the things that people tend to think of as CMO, over the past years, I've expanded it to add the CXO title, the Chief Experience Officer. Or when I was at SAP, it was Chief Storyteller. And people are always like, well, how do those things live together? And I'm always evolving my answer a little bit because the world's evolving. But I tend to think that the experience officer component is probably the most apropos for me, because for me, that's sort of trumps everything else. It's the guiding principle that, you think about what is your customer's experience, B2B or B2C, it doesn't matter. But what do you want their experience to be? What are the goals? And then you kind of use that insight and information to then plug into certainly traditional marketing efforts, but your e-commerce efforts, if you're direct to consumer, or even if you're not, but your e-commerce platform, if you've got a call center, your digital innovation, working with IT operations. So where do your customers come in? If there's a physical experience, if there's a digital experience, you take all of that and how do you plug that in? And so you use your marketing and your technical and your operational acumen to be able to execute there, obviously all with partners in each of those realms. But that's why I tend to think about experience first. And then all the marketing components certainly, underpin that. So I left as Party City a year ago. So it's been a year now. Loved being there, but I started in December of 19. And, my favorite saying is party and pandemic are not terribly synonymous. They don't live happily in the same sentence usually. We did a lot, though. We had a transformation team that was brought on to do just that. And a great underpinning, a great story. We were heavily in debt when we started, but we'd worked out, an arrangement to basically build ourselves a runway where we could transform. But that runway didn't take into account a massive pandemic followed by, a almost, at least from a business perspective, equally impactful supply chain crisis. And then hoping and thinking you could emerge after 2 years of that kind of onslaught, thinking things would turn around. And instead, we were slammed with record high inflation rates and a war in Ukraine. And so, that really put the damper on things. So it was, as a transformation agent, as a growth, that's not what was happening anymore. We were just treading water. And so I left in December. And of course, the company filed for bankruptcy in January. And they've now emerged from it under different ownership and private. But I chose to use the year to kind of regroup, go back to consulting. I've done that in the past. I like working to help companies who are sort of in a similar transformation, turnaround, growth, explosive growth mode. So that's what I've been doing. So I've had a myriad of clients this year, with one now that's primarily an Amazon focused retailer looking to be more present in sort of a DTC e-commerce platform. And so helping them just to rethink that and a few other things. But yeah, recently the National Kidney Foundation just was put on their board. I'd like to put this in there. I donated my kidney to my dad last year and was asked to join the NKF advisory board, which I was happy to do, just because I think kidney disease is not addressed as often as so many other, important healthcare crises that are out there. But it's a big one that affects a lot of people. And I think the idea of donating an organ is always one that most people are like, oh my God, no way. It's just, it is a big decision, but it is so much less invasive for the donor than it used to be. It's so much safer. Yeah, I was out of the hospital the next day. I mean, it's just not what it used to be. I always tell people, I don't know if you watched Terms of Endearment back in the 80s, 90s, with Julia Roberts and Sally Field, but the mother ends up donating her kidney to her daughter, but they're like, oh my God, they have to cut her in half to get this thing out. And that's what they used to do. And now it's laparoscopic. It's still invasive. It's still a big deal. But anyway, so I'm excited to be part of that and use some of my free time to support something that's, I think, really important, but it's personal to me too.
Yeah, well, kudos for doing that, both the donation and the continued support of what is a lower level of awareness than it should be.
Yeah.
Right? In particular, the fact that now that it's no longer as invasive as it might have been in the past, that people really need to consider it much more than they might have.
Right. When people are like, hey, get tested, it's a great way. Getting tested isn't, it's not quite as simple as just a blood test. You have to go in really and do some more testing. But it's not as invasive and is terrible. And what you give back. I mean, I can speak for my dad. He was on dialysis 5 times a day for 2.5 years, 5 times every day. You have to be, and he did the peritoneal, which is through the stomach, versus the one, that's like through your arms and things. But from a blood perspective, it's very limiting in terms of what you can do with your life. You've got these things attached to you, and like swinging a club, like it all gets in the way. And so the quality of life, and you can't be on it forever, so the quality of life that you give back and the ability to give life is really a gift. And I, now that I've done this, I know so many people who've been in, either have somebody sick or who've donated, it's just, I do want to create a bigger voice for it, because I do think it's important. And I think there's nothing else we can do, I think, greater with our lives here than to, help give the gift, besides being a woman, like giving birth, other than giving that kind of gift of life, but helping somebody, have a better quality of life is really tremendous.
Yeah, that's great. So back to marketing.
That was marketing. That was
marketing too. Yeah, of course. But one thing I really loved about the experience-focused way that you're looking at things is it's pretty common that I'll talk to a marketer, particularly at a brand level, and they sort of feel like marketing will solve it all, right? If we just get the right message to the right person at the right time, that's it. And they forget that the most important touch points are the ones where the person actually experiences the product or the service, and then you can completely destroy any gains you made on the marketing side, earned media or paid media, by not fulfilling on the brand promise, right? And so you're looking at it the other way around, by basically saying, well, we better be able to fulfill on the brand promise, and then we can start to worry about how do we get the word out, right? And so many different touch points are involved, from the experiencing the brand, experiencing the purchase process, call centers, as you indicated, all these other touch points that a typical CMO wouldn't even think about. That's like, oh, that's ops, that's operations. Like, I don't have to worry about that. Is the product delicious? Is it good? Does it solve the problem that it's supposed to solve? And then how do we do customer support? So I really like that. So for folks who are like having their epiphany now and being like, oh my God, I'm trying to sell an inferior product with great marketing, this sort of back to basics of let's make sure the product or service is right and fits the audience. For people just having that epiphany, how do you recommend they think about it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love all the words that you just said, and it's why you've been so successful and have the myriad of brands behind you that you do. And I know that's not the full list, by the way. It's exactly what you said. I've been around long enough to have experienced exactly what you talked about, which is, it's like, oh, sales are down, it must be marketing's fault. Oh, there's no chance it's the product or the price or
Right.
even like, the timing or anything, it's got to be marketing, so one,
Right.
you kind of get, as a marketer, when you get tired of that. Two, as a marketer, you often get tired by like, oh, well, I brought them to the door and you didn't do anything. Like, my job is to bring people to the house and your job is to sell them, get them over the threshold, whatever it is, whatever
Right.
analogy you want to use. And, as a marketer, you can go through that cycle of insanity and punishment, self-punishment. And I think it is self-punishment because
Yeah.
there's something that can be done about it. And I think, that's it. And it's not like I've been around for a long time. So it took me a while to kind of figure out, like, there's got to be a better way. And, finding a company and, other leaders around me that would hold hands and said, would you let me try this? Because what I don't want to, the first thing that'll get a company's attention is to come in as the marketer and say, I don't want to spend a single dollar until we fix these things. And they're
Right.
like, whoa, because marketers come in and it's usually, I need more money, right? That's the thing that they see us come in and they see, like, the proverbial handout everywhere we go. And mine is the opposite. It's like, I don't want to spend a dollar because I don't want to bring somebody to the table that the promise is not being delivered upon.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I started this experience piece. And it actually, my first true experience happened at a B2B company called Abra Auto Body and Glass. So it was after, and I would say I had always touched on it a little bit. I had left SAP and I went to this private equity owned company, Hellman Freeman owned it, called Abra Auto Body and Glass. They owned 600 collision shops. So I went from this very sexy global job to being CMO of body shops. And I did it because I thought it was a great Harvard business case in the making. And so you think, oh, I'm going to be CMO. Well, people only get into car accidents that need body work on average once every 7 years. So knock on wood, Kevin, if you were your kids, it's been 7 years. So when they go, I don't need to necessarily advertise because you're not going to, like, that's for the once every 7 years occurrence.
Yeah.
And my actual revenue generating consumer is the insurance carrier. That's where we get paid, but I've got to fulfill it at the end consumer level, right? So it's a very B2B2C environment. So in that notion, then it's like, well, what can I do then from marketing to actually accelerate? So that's where, and this was back in 2017, I went to the CEO and I was like, and it's a woman now who she and I worked together with at Ford, at Chrysler. So very much, on the same wavelength and knew each other a long time, which is helpful. And I said, Ann, I want to be the chief experience officer. And it was a title I had never heard. And so I don't know if I was the first. We'll have to do a little study. I don't really care, but it was, it was something I'd never heard. And it was useful from a marketing perspective because people were like, what does a chief experience officer do? And I'm glad you asked. So I could explain. And so for that experience, what we did was we basically, my engineering degree pops in the leaky bucket analysis. That was the old school term for, like, you got a bucket of water and it's like you're leaking water somewhere, but you don't know where. So you look for where those leaky, the bucket is leaking, the little holes. Mm-hmm. You can do the same thing in sort of that sieve, funnel mentality when you look at the customers that are coming in this case from the insurance carrier, right? Those are all the opportunities we have coming into the call center, right? From the call center. And then how are we able to get those calls converted to an appointment? How are we going to get those appointments for an estimate converted to a repair order? Repair order is really that conversion process. That's where the money comes.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you keep the insurance carrier happy so that they continue to give you those leads? So that's like in a very simplified way, that was the
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem. So there was a lot to do with operations that we went in and mapped the whole process end to end, before, after, and you could find holes. There were things operationally that we needed to fix, front end, off, so worked with the operations team. Like, here's what we're finding. Worked with HR. Here's what we see with training. Here's the opportunities. But then on the other end, and I had the call center reporting to me as well, and I asked for it because most marketers don't, because it sounds like a headache and grimbly. It's the front lines. Like, if you want to manage the front lines, because that's your conversion rate, all the KPIs you have as a marketer, that's where it starts. And if you don't take that opportunity, you're missing out. You're also missing out on insights about what the process is and what can be improved to actually make those conversions stronger. So, like basically lifting that up, it was like, okay, what do we know? Well, in addition to the issues, like once we get them through the door operationally, K, training our people, K, then there's the, how do we get them to say yes? Well, they were getting phone calls from our call center, which were 800 numbers. How often do you pick up an 800 number on your phone? Like, less than 1% of the time is the answer across the board. So why were we doing that? Pick a local number. At least you have a higher percentage chance. Okay. Now it's, then, so little things like that, right?
Yeah.
Then you can go through and it was like, okay, what are the biggest complaints once we get them there? Well, they call all the time because, as you know, when you drop your car off, well, first of all, biggest issue is, in a world where we can order a pizza online, we can put stuff on a half of it, something else on the other half. We can tell them where to go. We can tell them what time we want it. We can watch the progress of it. We know when they're putting the pepperoni on, how many minutes are left in the oven, and then we can watch it in the car as it winds its way to us. In that world, how is it that where I take probably my most expensive or second most expensive asset, and I'm already like traumatized because I've in some way, whether it's a massive trauma where something might have been really bad, or maybe even a minor trauma where it was just a fender bender, I now have to take this thing. My life is upended. I have to have a rental car. What if I have to take my kids to work? Like, this whole scenario of these people. And what do we do to make things easier for them? Oh, well, we make them call the insurance carrier. Then we make them call a list of body shops. Then we make them drive over. Then we make them get a paper estimate. Then we're like, then we make them drop it off and make them call a car rental. And then we make them, it's so, analog driven. There was no automation in this whatsoever. And then it's like you drop it off in this black hole. Most body shops are not places you would leave anything, much less your second most expensive asset, but you have to. And then it's like a black hole. You're at everybody's mercy, just trying to get an ounce of information. And it's impossible. You're making a call. You're like pins and all of that just makes for a huge opportunity to do something so much better in a more automated way. So you look at that and you find out where people either fell out of your bucket, where they literally like just opted out or left, or where they were opted in, but had a bad experience, like were really negative and were like, I don't ever want to have to, it's like going to the dentist. I'm going to do everything I can to avoid it. I'm going to do everything, whatever. I'm never going to recommend it. Like, the whole thing is bad, including, by the way, they often then want to change insurance carriers because the insurance carrier gets, their rates are going to go, like all kinds of things. But that's the kind of thing that we tried to address. And it's the simplest thought, but that really is where marketing is. Then we worked with the IT team and we built, wow, like Eureka, why don't you schedule an appointment online? You don't have to call. Wow, when you do that, let us connect your rental car experience so you can book that all at the same time and all the billing will go through at once. Wow, here's a little app and sort of like, you're downloading and you can see the bar go and like how much longer you have. Like, here's how far the progress is on your car. Here's a stage. It should be ready. Oh, you want to click to chat just to ask a question so you don't have to call. Again, all of this was totally off the shelf. None of this was like, oh my God, that is groundbreaking technology. This is simply applying things that had been like, in the pizza industry for, 5 years, 10 years at that time, and applying it to something that was much more meaningful for most cases to people. And it changed the fortunes of the company. I mean, there were lots of things, so this isn't taking full credit, but it was a meaningful component where we were able to improve the conversion rate by 10 points. And every point of conversion was worth about $1 million in EBITDA in true margin, because it doesn't really cost you anymore to convert that. You're just
Right.
improving the experience. So that actually helped. And we sold the company in 18 months. And that was my first experience. But I share that story because you were asking, like, how, if people are having an epiphany in that eureka moment, how do you think about it? I would just encourage people to think about that leaky bucket analysis. Start with that. I did that at Party City then next. Same thing. Like, how did people come into us? Why? Where else do they shop? When they come to us, where do they fall out? That's on the e-commerce experience. That's in the store experience. And it's the exact same scenario repeated. Had to work with operations, had to work with HR, worked with IT. I had the call center, huge insights, like all those things. That it's the same process that can be applied. It's the ability to step way back and take a moment to look at that before you say, now I want to invest in this message, in these mediums, in a more traditional marketing format, because now I know that when I bring them, I can convert them.
Yeah. The other thing I really love about that, and sometimes it does require like a PE firm or a major change in upper management to sort of force that epiphany on the organization. And
Sure.
often when it's asked to do due diligence consulting on a pre-purchase of an acquisition by a PE firm, we try to push the boundaries of our due diligence beyond the walls of what would typically be in our roles and responsibilities, which is
Right.
like digital media footprint, because of the fact that all the media we're buying and advising on is in an auction, right?
Right.
Meaning the more you want, the more you have to pay at the margin. So all those efficiencies that you just talked about manifest themselves as leverage in being able to afford more media, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
right.
adding all those layers of efficiency post sort of delivery of the lead to the system, right? And increasing LTV and, understanding all of those factors and, doubling down on the kinds of customers who are twice as valuable as the average, right? All of that manifests itself as the ability to spend more effectively and efficiently. So that's like my favorite part of it, right? Is like you fix all this op stuff that's typically, behind the curtain for marketing, but it becomes a benefit that marketing can use to dramatically scale up the business.
It also creates so much more credibility in the C-suite. I mean, that's the other piece is, I always encourage marketers, whether or not you truly have a P&L responsibility, you are still a member of the company with P&L responsibility. So even if it's not directly to you, now I had e-commerce P&L as well as I built a couple of new divisions, same sort of thing. But you have to have the mindset that you're responsible for driving the bottom line, top line and bottom line, right? So that means paying attention to your costs and not overdoing, but really thinking about what are the KPIs that the company, and if you're in a PE firm, the PE firm will drive what those KPIs need to be.
Yeah.
And that will get translated by the upper echelon of management and then within the departments, whether or not you're middle layer manager, top layer, those are really important to know and have your eye on. Because if you can then go into a meeting at any level and say, here's what I do, but knowing that this is, we care about conversion, we care about margin, and we want to keep our costs, of course, in check, but let's just think about those two things. Here's what I would suggest that we do, and here's why. And you bring that forward, that changes so much of the way people think about marketing and the role that marketing plays and the success of the growth of the company or the transformation of the company. Because many people in operations and finance in particular, and others, but particularly ops and finance, are so accustomed to marketers coming in and it's all about like, well, I just need to spend, we just need more, and when you change that and you're coming in and you say, no, I care about what you care about, right? If we all care about these core KPIs, those are the ones we care about. Okay, this is what I think we need to do. And frankly, you don't need me to do this over here. You need me to do this here, which helps you on the operations team. If we can do that, if you can, then we will start to see that. And once we start to see that improve, then we can invest to bring more people in. But frankly, that kind of conversations, I think for many companies who are not used to that, you would see them all take a step back and be like, whoa, what's happening here? And it does change your credibility. It changes how then when you come forward with other maybe innovations or out of the box suggestions, you get a much different level of interest and open-mindedness to that than you would if you kind of continue what I'll call the traditional marketing line of discussion.
Right, right. So if you're in a position that you're lucky enough to have within your purview all of those various things, and you're sort of trying to decide between like what is the short, intermediate, and long-term playbook and roadmap versus, oh, there might be some low-hanging fruit that I could just knock out really fast. I mean, the temptation must be to sometimes just say like, all right, well, I can just knock out like, and I can add 15 to 18% efficiency right over there before I get around to these other things, because I'm going to have headwinds, right, in redoing the call center or redoing supply chain or whatever it is that maybe is tangential to your named responsibility, but you do have enough influence to change in one way or another.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, of course. Oh, for sure. And my answer is yes to all the words you said. And the reason it's yes is that it's an and, it's not an or.
Okay.
I personally, for me, I'm a huge believer in the low hanging fruit concept because I come in, and because I come in well known that, you have to be super authentic about who you are. So the CEO, the board, they all know when I come in, transformation, change management, like none of these things are easy. You have to really pressure test. I was just helping a former employee who's interviewing for a job, and I'm helping her pressure test. There's a lot of things. The job itself is one thing. It's the culture. The culture is everything. And I'm like, have a separate conversation apart from money and just talk about culture. Like really pressure test everybody talks a good game about transformation and change, but it's hard and it's painful and it creates disruption. And so really pressure test that through these examples and see if you get there. Like, so now answer your, if you get there, then my experience, the best way to get the masses along with you. So you got to have the CEO and the board and that's the first one. And that's the pressure testing we're talking. Then it's like, you gotta get some low hanging fruit. And so without a doubt, there's 100%, no exceptions in all of the areas I've ever looked, like whether it's call center, whether it's just digital marketing, whether it's CRM, whether it's e-commerce, it doesn't matter, anything. There's always low hanging fruit to be had there.
Right.
And I would suggest that the way you choose the low hanging fruit is in alignment with your roadmap. So you can go ahead and do I would call it, journey mapping a little bit, a true journey mapping, the leaky bucket analysis. You can get that going. The way that you buy yourself time doing that and with the low hanging fruit is the journey mapping process that I have done at the companies involves members from almost every department, because they all see the customer experience from their chairs in a different way. And in some cases, they are all customers too. So they've experienced it as an actual customer and not just as an employee serving a customer. So bringing them in and like creating an organized journey mapping, it involves very high tech things like sticky notes and pens and markers. But those are like, you create a room and you really build this out. First of all, now you've built some credibility because you're bringing in everybody else, which it indicates to them that you don't feel like you have all the answers on your own or in your department. Great. So that already builds a little bit of credibility for you. From that, you're going to help to build a pretty quick map of like, there's 97 opportunities. We only have the resources and money to do a handful of them. In order to be successful in that handful, we're going to need the partnership and alignment with IT, ops, HR, whatever else, finance, whatever else you're going to need. And within that list, there's a couple of little things that we could do with maybe just us or us and one other group, just to show that we know what we're talking about and that what we found here is an opportunity. And you can make those little adjustments and get everybody like, oh yeah, we talked about that. They were part of that conversation. Yeah, we saw that. Oh my gosh, yeah, that works. So you parallel path those things. And that's how I have found you can not only get things going and really moving, but you're building a lot of goodwill and confidence and, collaboration across the entire organization, which you're going to need in spades, because that first stuff is easy, right? It gets real hard and real messy after that. And so you've got to create a lot of credibility for what you're doing. And those little low hanging fruits help in the journey. And it also helps for you to say, like, all 97 things, that's great. Well, we're going to narrow it down to this. That prioritization also helps you with credibility, because then you have to go up to the C-suite and say, I want to do these few things. What do you want? They all have a list of 97 things too, right? So how do we then shuffle the deck in there so that what are the ones that we agree on, because they're going to deliver on those KPIs the best, right? And that's the hand holding that has to happen along the way. And so that's, that's a little bit of the recipe. It's a lot of, it's not really politicking, I wouldn't say, because you're not trying to get a vote. What you're trying to do is convince people that you've got the best interests of the company at heart, and that the work you do in some cases is going to make them more successful. Like some of the improvements in operations and just sort of how things happen in the stores, for instance, we'll make recommendations, we'll help build maybe some signage or some digital interaction or whatever. But at the end of the day, the operational P&L is going to see the benefit. It's not going to see. So you're making everybody else a hero along the way. And that's a really important component of sort of this change transformation too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Try to make everybody a hero, because then you've got a friend for life.
Right. And at the end of the day, you're doing the thing that you want to do, right? And be respected. But it's not all about being able to personally say, oh, the accolades. It's like, no, we were an input and are so proud to be supporting, because then they rely on you, right? Now you've created a reliance where those groups say, like, oh no, we need to bring them in, because we need to ask them to help us. Like, what should we be thinking about? That's how you really create an unlock.
Absolutely. Well, let's assume that some of the folks now have decided that 2024 will be the year where we do or complete our digital transformation, and we start to look at these unlocks that are sort of stuck either in departmental silos or whatever. Now, they may not have the opportunity to sort of break down the silos in Q1, but they're certainly already thinking a lot about budgeting for the next year. So are there any good frameworks? I always like to look at marginal impact of every channel and everything within paid media. And then there's, of course, earned media versus paid media. Sometimes CMOs and the CFOs struggle with how to decide, well, how do we allocate between those? Like, are there any ways you found to be really useful when it's budgeting season and you're trying to sort of plan out the year? Now, I think next year will probably be much more agile than most other years, because with AI in the mix, stuff that worked last month may not work next month.
Oh,
but,
right.
It'll certainly have to be much more fluid than it has been in the past. But certain people in certain organizations, they like a pretty locked down budgeting plan. It's subject to change in Q2 maybe, but how do you like to sort of attack the budgeting challenge?
Yeah. Budgeting season. Boy, it's like the one thing about being a consultant that's the best is I'm not doing budgets. They'd be locked down and done by this point.
Right.
Oh, but at Party City, it was torture. September was the worst, because at Party City, Halloween's the biggest season, that holiday of the year. And so you're like in the heat of Halloween and you're having about, boy, that was a painful month. What we did, look, I would say, to your point, it's different in many companies. It's depending on the company's position, where they are at that moment, what kind of year they had that year that you're planning for the next year, because if you didn't have a very good year, the amount of money you have to spend next year is already limited, and very few people are willing to be optimistic about things going up dramatically. I mean, I think everybody has to be optimistic that it's going to improve, but that's a hard place. And a lot of people had a pretty tough 23 and 22. It's been a tough couple of years for a lot of companies. So it's a tough place to be. That said, the way that I like to think about budgets is you first, you talked about earned, owned, paid media. I start before that. I really pull back well below that. And let's just start with working and non-working. That's how I like to begin, because first of all, to your point, the budget you get is often an allocation based on % of revenue. That's how a lot of companies do that. And it's always a little bit of there's certainly nuances within that, but generally speaking, it's a decent place that companies start.
Right.
But within that, then, particularly with the CEO and CFO, the conversation has to be working and non-working media. If my non-working media is greater than 50%, that's a problem, right? That's a problem. doesn't, if I have to spend more money paying agencies, sorry, that are, and paying for software and paying licensing, like that, then I am actually putting messaging and marketing out there. That's a problem, that I'm not doing a very good job. So that's sort of where the cost and the real, and even your headcount, right? There's working, non-working media, but then I've got a bigger budget that includes headcount. And so I even like loop all of that together and think of what is my total budget. And that would include the fixed cost of the headcount and that as well as sort of the paid and the non-working and working media. That's a really important balance, because that's, as your own mini CEO, that's what you're looking at. Right. So that's job one. So bringing your non-working media down to a threshold that's closer to, the 25-30%, I think is optimal. Sometimes that's a challenge. It depends. And like the smaller your budget, sometimes the harder that becomes, because if there's infrastructure you need, but that's where you got to start to make some real decisions. And I would say, I made decisions early on, again, we were in a transformation mode at Party City. So I was cutting budgets when I was like, we'll do it for far less. And I just wiped out a bunch of fixed costs. And a lot of, things that I think had built up. And there's a lot, it's worth having a fresh set of eyes look at things. There's a lot of legacy stuff that becomes like the old clothes in your closet in the back that you haven't seen, or shoes you haven't. The same sort of thing happens on our budget. It just does, and so it's really, I bring in somebody in like a fresh look to probe you, like just to go like, hey, that's always a good idea. Even if you don't tell everybody you're doing it, it's good for you because, but we won't go down that. But that's where I start. And then, and then you kind of go through and you think about, well, if we're really in a tough place, so I'm going to speak to those people who are like, gosh, but it's a challenge. Because when things are easier, there's a lot more wiggle room. I took out a lot of traditional media. I moved us completely out of TV. I moved us completely out of print and radio. So I took us out of all the traditional mediums and we went 100% digital. That created heartburn with a lot of people, because that's a massive change.
Sure.
But given the industry we were in, what we were doing, I thought where people were finding us, how we could
shopping,
greater conversion. And you can find a lot of efficiencies. Now I didn't think about the cost. Like it changed the amount of content I needed, because now I'm creating it for one, basic, well, not just one, even in digital, you've got multiple formats, but I'm doing one big format versus the others. Print and television are very different. You can't use video for TV the way, and just plop it into digital. So that helped reduce. You think about the agency support, reduced. Your media plan becomes less complicated. You creates greater buying efficiencies because you're narrowing that media spend to fewer channels. So it does some things for you. So I would encourage a really hard look when things are tight and making hard decisions instead of trying to be, you want to have diversity in your media plan, but I would suggest that there is some level of diversity that is a luxury. And unless you've got budgets of a certain level, I would say less is more until you can start to really gain some traction.
Yeah. I mean, one of our internal marketing strategies for next year is to actually go in and do sort of austerity planning for marketing budgets. Like, how can you achieve the same or more with less? Yep. And sometimes be that party that is another set of eyes. And of course, you have to be careful of sort of how you go in there, because not everybody wants another set of eyes.
There's a lot of there's a lot of sacred cows, as we know, and so that's why sometimes it's better a third party just to ask the question.
Yeah, sure. And of course, we've had jokes over the years about certain things that remain in the marketing plan or media plan because it's the CEO's pet thing, right? Sponsoring that golf thing, right? Does it have a positive ROI? Doesn't matter. It's the CEO's thing, right? So that happens, even within keyword bidding, right? The CEO has a specific keyword they want to have at the top. Doesn't matter what the ROI is on it. And so, you always have to carve out these exceptions as you do the marginal impact analyses of marketing plans.
No doubt.
One other fun thing about, like, I liked your idea of sort of a digital centric plan for a company where that's where the consumer lives and makes their decisions. But one other thing that happens there is that ability to reuse the assets, right?
Yeah.
As you're creating the owned and earned media assets, and sometimes those even turn into ad units that you
Yeah.
can use in paid media. You know, what level of efficiency gain do you think people might expect from that kind of centralization that occurs? As you sort of remove the superfluous things, which are one-offs.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I think putting a number on it, I don't know, but there's certainly meaningful. I would say there's meaningful efficiencies there. But it made me think about just things that I've been, kind of consulting. I can get deeper into some of the kind of the new tools. And
Right.
I just had a presentation, as you were talking about, with AI and budgets, right? I just had a presentation from somebody who's steeped in that over in Switzerland. And, you know, you think about this area of content, there's these tools now where literally he was showing a video where they created like animation of it looked like as good as any Disney anime. I mean, like it was good animation, and they just typed in like, I don't know, dog riding a horseback in the Arizona. Like, I mean, like they just put the detail and it's like boom, and it's
Yeah.
going across your screen. You know, in addition to the efficiencies, I think that we're thinking about, or most people here watching this might be thinking about, that could be gained, and how could you repurpose and use that content? There's a new sheriff in town with this AI kind of creating content that creates a level of efficiency I don't think we'll have ever seen before.
Yeah.
I can't speak to having leveraged it yet with one of my clients or myself, but I think Q1 there'd be somebody like, I mean, and that is a game changer. And so you think about that from an efficiency standpoint, I think then, obviously there's we can go into a lot of issues potentially, intended and unintended with AI. But the other would be, other thought on content creation would be, do you get out of control with it? Like, do you lose the principles of like right message to right audience with right level of frequency,
Mhm.
because you could go crazy and feel
Sure.
like, oh my God, I've been so limited. I could create, 20 assets, and
For
now I
micro segments.
20,000 assets and
Yeah.
like for free, basically, like, you know what I mean? And so like, or the whatever the software is going to cost me a month, basically that's it. And so then you lose a little bit of sight to what it is you're trying to do. So I think there could be a kid in a candy store gone wild
Hmm.
scenario that could play out if you're not super disciplined. But I do think, yes, there's efficiency, but I think there's a whole level that's like literally around the corner that will be really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other related elements to that is the conversations that we sometimes either are part of or overhear at the brands about production quality if it's video type assets, right? Because 15 years ago, everything had to be this production quality where you couldn't pull off any video for less than $50,000, right? And now for certain brands, selfie stick iPhone video is perfectly on brand with an influencer, not even a paid actor, right?
Yeah.
And so now you've got the continuum from the $1 million Super Bowl shoot all the way down to, yeah, and some influencer did it, right? And so as one thinks about one's content roadmap and editorial calendar and all that stuff around media and marketing, how should people think about that? And will it work for my brand? Like, can I have a man in the street? Can I have customer testimonials that are a little bit raw and authentic? Or is it going to be sort of not in keeping with my brand?
All of my big time creative director friends are all probably, just throwing things like, because it's like their worst nightmare, right? I mean,
Yeah,
their worst nightmare. These people are super talented and have built this, and now like any schmuck with a laptop can do. And I'm not suggesting that it's going to be necessarily as good, but
right.
it's going to be good enough for the
Hmm.
vast majority. And that's,
Right.
so is there a little bit of loss of art? Yeah, it's a different kind of art. I mean, like it's the world that we're in, and it's quick and accessible. And to be honest, yeah, I mean, having done several Super Bowl ads in my day, big auto, and I've been there, done that,
Yeah.
really expensive, you know, like no way would I do that anymore. No
Yeah.
way. No
Yeah.
way is the answer. Just there's no way that I could justify the ROI of that kind of investment in a million years, and so I'm not even sure with the media placement, but suddenly if I'm building it through AI and I'm putting it and I just buy the spot, is that a test I'd like to have? Sure. Just if I work for a company with that kind of budget again.
Well, it goes to your working media analysis, right?
Yeah.
But if you can take those production costs and the agency overlay on top of those, and you can say, oh, I'm just going to float a QR code across the screen. Like that's my Super Bowl ad.
Right.
Right?
Well, we saw that last year, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I remember it.
That was
We got
Coinbase. It was Coinbase, I think. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's right. It was just a guy with a QR code who was like pointing up at I again, not for brand recognition, but I remember
Yeah.
the ad. I have no idea what it was for.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, no, but that's like there's a lot there. I think to your point about brand, look, I'm a marketer from like the word go, so brand has always been important, but I would say there's a very small percentage of brands where it's important. Look, I'm going to use all the wrong words, but where like the quality, like being film, where they're artsy enough, or they're so high end luxury that the viewer is going to. Did you just see balloons come on my
Yes.
face? Okay, so weird. Somebody told me, I'm like, sorry, departure. Somebody told me that like the way I move my hands sometimes it triggers something that somebody knows what this is. Tell me this happens. For some reason, I get balloons. So whatever I do with my hands, I'm gonna see if I can make it happen again. I don't know. I get balloons. Anyway, so sorry, back to our program. So the idea that and I'm trying to think of a few brands. I just can't think of too many that really
Right.
invest in particularly television. I mean, you might think like, oh, what about auto? Well, like, Bugatti's not doing auto ads, like, on TV, like, it's
Yeah.
the big masks who are doing it on there. And I would say those brands, you can still be on brand, authentically about the brand and not have that level of production quality.
Yeah.
I don't think people expect that, oh, if I did an AI ad, or if I had an influencer, that somehow because the production quality, that's going to translate into the quality of my vehicle. If the message is off, if what they're saying is off, is not about quality, like if all those, yes, there's other elements that I think speak to quality more than necessarily the film production component of it. There's a range, but I think those things are changing and how people accept and see a
Yeah.
brand.
And I also love the fact that, if you double down on production of doing something super snazzy from a production quality, and for whatever reason it didn't resonate, you just spent all your budget on something that didn't work, right? Whereas if you did 5 or 6 things that were sort of a little bit more authentic and earthy, and then you tested them and you found that one really popped, you'd be like, okay, that's the one that's going to get my media dollars.
Right. I mean, that's exactly right. And you think, I mean, and you think about even some of these high-end brands like LVMH and those, they were, pick a liqueur, pick a jewelry, Tiffany, like pick your poison there. How could you not get across the beauty and the quality? And there's in a way that's not necessarily with a traditional film. I think so. And I think that there's some element that says it's maybe even important to start to try that, because your audience is, you want to have an audience that is kind of always the similar age or same age. And that means that you're going to have to keep reaching younger, right? Because the if you're in the 35 to 54, they graduate, like, you know what I mean? And suddenly you need to do the new 35 to 54s are thinking about things in a very different way.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be relevant to them. And that doesn't mean changing who you are as a brand, but it might be changing how you display yourself. And so I think that there's and that's gonna be hard for a lot of purists but again, what's your KPI? Because at the end of the day, we can have a lot of subjective conversation about creativity. And, that was always the case. The beauty of this world is we can have that conversation for fun, and it's intellectually stimulating, but I can measure it. And at the end of the day, it goes back to that KPI conversation. let's just test these things and let's just see. And like at the end of the day, I'm all for testing as many things as we can cheaply, and then let's just see. And
Yeah.
that you can do the talking that way. And then it doesn't have to be subjective, and you don't have to make big, $1 million bets without knowing the outcome. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the beauty of where we are.
Absolutely. I'd love to get to another arc that has gone through our, participation in marketing was in our early days, right? The way we targeted was like purely context because it was the show that we bought or drive time or prime time or soap operas because if you were in soap, you'd be
Friends.
on the soap opera, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a fairly blunt level targeting instrument. And now, sure, you could buy magazine ads in a fluffy kitty magazine and hit those people, but generally, any kind of media that had tonnage behind it was going to be sort of context targeted. And then digital rolled out, and we had the cookies, and we had the auto intenders, which, whether you believe it or not, was hypothetically auto intenders. And now with the third party cookie disappearing and IDFA and all this, you sort of got now you're back to more blunt level targeting tools. But we'd still, as marketers, love to delight the consumer by not showing them Pampers ads if they have no babies, and we don't want to show them denture ads if their teeth are perfectly fine and they're 21 years old, right? So you still would love to figure out how to delight the consumer with better targeting, but there's this sort of inherent tug of war going on between how do we respect the consumer's privacy but yet give them relevant advertising. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how that's going to shake out in the next year, but do you have any thoughts of where that's
going? I don't know either, but I do think it kind of goes back. I think it goes back to the conversation we were having about testing. Yeah. Because I just my most recent experience with Party City, very similar. It's like, at least the good news is you can party at any age, but do I want to show like a 5-year-old birthday party to somebody who's maybe 55 and maybe doesn't have a grandchild yet and probably doesn't have a 5-year-old of their own? I mean, anything's possible, but you're kind of narrowing down your target at that point. So you want to be relevant, but at the same time, we did so much testing, like in social commerce, Pinterest, partnering with Pinterest because people were going there and, well, could we figure out like if they were posting party photos or liking party photos, could we make those shoppable and then it would come over to us and they could buy that party? Or could we then basically take that party and create a basket of the products similar to, right. Those are the kinds of things that I was divesting. I mean, you have to have a certain presence like in Google Shopping and some of those places. But if you're truly like a retail, and I'm speaking retail because it's different, obviously, depending on the category. I think that there's worth testing the idea of pushing more money into places that allow you to have brand focus because you want to keep your brand relevant. You don't want to go all bottom funnel, but also kind of create a greater conversion opportunity. And so that's the kind of the testing component, because these ad placements that you're talking about, which sometimes because now the privacy balance is important, it could be that you lose a little relevance, and it could be that you're also, again, going back to sort of the legacy and the hook and everything's measurable and we can just know now, we don't have to actually guess, do we need, we might need to go back and retest that, because even if it was working last year, it may not work as well this year. And so you've got to be willing to test and challenge your own norms, I think, all the time. And sometimes it can be on a campaign level. Maybe it's, across the board. Maybe it's at a category level, but those are the kinds of things that I would say in the face, especially of the sort of this privacy, adjustments that we're all having to make as marketers. I think it's worth re-looking at that. And I do think it could possibly hurt the sort of the traditional ad placement positions. Mm-hmm. But I think that's like all change in some way has to have something good to it. That might be a good thing because it usually opens up other avenues and vehicles for positioning and for putting your brand out there that you had been reluctant to do because it was like, how could I not put some money? Like I have to get that frequency and that, okay, well now maybe that frequency has a lot less quality attached to it. So maybe we pull a little off of that. And so I do think that's I think it's a lot more test and learn
Yeah.
now, and being willing to take away from sort of that insurance safety net, which is like, well, we have to have a thin balance. Here is our base of always being X% of our budget in ad placement, because that's going to give us our base threshold. Well, maybe that quality threshold is sandier than concrete now. And so maybe the new threshold has to be something else, that baseline.
Yeah. So larger marketers, often they'll have a big enough customer set that they'll be able to sort of identify either psychographic or demographic clusters that are pretty big, or maybe they're even assigning personas to the different kinds of buyers, right? They want to be able to market and message to those groups separately. But then, of course, end up going down the rabbit hole that you discussed, which is, well, my production costs just went through the roof because now I'm going too narrow potentially in my messaging. So is nirvana the idea that I can find a unified message, right, and a unified set of creative that I can pretty much run against my various personas and my various psychographic and demographic groups that will work for everybody and have me have lower production costs? Or should I then decide, okay, well, there's 3 buckets. I need 3. These are 3 very different people. They're buying differently. I need to have different messaging.
Yeah. Gosh, so many things going through my head as you're asking that question. The first is that, sure, that's nirvana, but it's unrealistic because
right.
People are complex beings who want to be treated specially. And like, there's your answer. There's never going to be one. Like, that's impossible. Like, there's just no way. Right. Hell, I can't keep everybody in my own house happy, much less like a target audience. So, you know, yeah, so you want to narrow, like, the personas, I think, is a really useful tool to narrow down. But that's a little bit of where I'm kind of excited about AI, which is getting closer to consumer motivation at a given time. And maybe that starts to lock into sort of where people are at the moment. You know, if they're, again, we can't cookie them necessarily on where they've gone anymore, but if you could know that they're on this site or this page on the site, like then people who, the large majority are in this intent. Well, let's serve up this kind of ad. It's having sort of it's that game. It's like those games that used to play where you had multiple scenarios and you plug in a scenario at a given moment, but it was different for each time you played it. It would almost be great to be like that, right? If I go on the same page, you go on the same page, it varies a little bit based on sort of how we're able to see maybe your path through even that existing site. Maybe even it's not about the cookies, but there's got to be, I think, some way now with the production issue we talked about, maybe with using AI, that it gives us the opportunity to have some options that we can test to see what works. And at the end of the day, I think you're gonna, if you've got a brand that has multiple categories, you're gonna have to have some variety. I think to get people engaged, frankly. And that's why we use influencers, because they create stuff we wouldn't think about, and their friend, like, that's why that has been successful, and they have their own followers, and that's always been the goal, is to get other people to do the marketing for us. And yeah, now we have to pay them a little bit to do it for us, but hey, it's still better than, and the world is responding to that these days. So maybe can we even empower them with some tools? Do we empower them with some tools that are maybe AI based, but connected to our brand database, so that the LLM that we share is still proprietary to us, but leveraged by them, so that, again, kind of earlier to that point about the branding and staying true to brand, like you could have better branded content even for paid influencers. I think there's a lot to be played with in that space.
Yeah. And that's going to be a really fascinating one, because the FTC recently has been cracking down again on influencers that are on the payroll, but it's not as clear as the FTC would like that they're on payroll.
Right.
And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on sort of where that'll shake out for next year.
I don't know. We have so many issues in government. It feels like this isn't the thing that's the, but anyway,
not the biggest problem, right?
Right. Okay. So, but that said, it will, if I had to guess, it'd probably go to the same with contractor, that for anybody who, works for a company and has had contractors, sometimes you end up with contractors that are there for years. And it was, a few years ago, I don't even know how many years ago now, but it was like, oh, there was a big crackdown because it was like, if you've got a contractor who's been on for, I can't remember what the rule is now, it's 12 months or something, then you either have to hire them as an FTE where you're paying benefit, or you have to let them go. Like there's like a contractor by definition was like a temporary role. And so they defined a time for what temporary meant. And then you either had to, and some of those contractors were professional contractors. So they didn't want to be hired full time, but they became sort of an indispensable part of what you considered sort of your team. And that created a lot of issues. And like, oh, what do we do to work around that? And, it's like, then you have to kind of hire the agency and they have to set up an agency and then you can have an agency contract with, so
yeah.
I believe it could very much go that way where it's, we always find workarounds as marketers with our finance partners. So maybe like these influencers have to become, small businesses and then, then you've got the different tax, implication. But my guess is that's sort of how they'll solve it. They'll use something that they've used in a similar vein before and apply it.
Right.
Just to keep us all on our toes.
Yeah, as if we didn't have.
Right, because I got nothing else to do.
So what has you excited for next year, for 2024?
Well, it's so trite, right? AI is like but it is exciting because it's, I don't think there's anything been quite this potentially impactful since literally living in the digital era. You know what I mean? Like since the web was out there in the mid 90s, as a tool for us to really market with. I mean, there's been a lot of things people be like, oh, but we thought that was, there's always something exciting every virtual reality, augmented reality. Like there's always cool things, no doubt. This is very different. And there's so many, again, it's growing so quickly. I don't believe it'll go away. There's a lot of things that like, I'm not sure virtual reality is going to be like, but this is, I would put a lot of money that this is the thing. And it's going to have large implications and not just on marketing, but on all kinds of businesses. And, they talk about, oh, it could, replace, they were worried about robots replacing people. Well, there'll be AI replacing people. I think that's true, but they're talking about it having an outsized implication, not necessarily on like blue collar workers or lower level employees, but even higher level employees, and so it's the first time I think that you've got sort of the middle management and upper management threatened by another intelligent source of decision making. And maybe for the first time, those that actually physically do things with their hands and make things are protected, and like widgets things. So it's a very different, like I said, this is a very different, evolution that I think is going to be wildly transformative. There's good and bad. And there's a lot of things that we can worry about. I mean, we can worry about the Terminators uprising, but, but I do think that there could be some really positive things if we harness it in the right way.
For sure. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Julie. It was a pleasure catching up and talking about all the implications of the way we're doing marketing now and the way we should do it in the future. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's always so much fun to spend time with you, Kevin.
Likewise.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.